Hi. Well, I'm here with Stevan, and he's assistant professor of dance at Kennesaw State. And we're going to talk a little bit about education, right?
Yes, correct.
All right. Well, we've been talking for some time, so we got a lot of ground to cover, but we'll try to limit it.
Okay.
So, you've recently become certified in online education. What was the name of that program again?
It's called Quality Matters.
Right, and this is a semester-long course, and you learned about the techniques of online education, some of the advantages, how to do it, how to make courses. What would you say is the main thing that you learned from that you're the most excited about in terms of providing a really good education to students today?
When it comes to online education,
right.
or in general? I think a lot of times as pedagogues we talk about, how do we engage our students with the material itself that we present to them, or the subject itself. We talk about what are the most effective ways for us to relate to students and foster that learning environment that's very conducive and encouraging to their growth. But I think one thing that we don't talk a lot about is how do we engage students when it comes to their experiences as peer-to-peer engagement. And what I really love and appreciate about this online certification program that's called Quality Matters is really focusing on how do we foster activities, very effective activities that would actually prepare our students to do a lot of student engagement and exchange of information between each other before they actually participate in online lesson, for instance. And I know that from a traditional face-to-face lecturing that we usually do, that we usually don't, at least in the College of Fine Arts, we don't put a lot of emphasis on preparation that our students have to do before they come to the class.
Right.
I mean, we give them some basic readings and things like that, but I think we don't give them enough opportunity to engage with each other and with the material before they come.
Even before. So you're talking about maybe the flipped classroom as one of the examples of ways that they can do peer-to-peer learning before that they come into a lecture, or in your case, a lot of this is studio work, or am I wrong in thinking that?
I was actually working on developing a brand new course that will be a movement analysis and dance criticism class.
Oh wow! So that's cool.
Yeah.
So you might. How would you do that? For example, how would you do that for peer-to-peer learning in a dance criticism class? How might give me an example?
Well, for instance, we're encouraged to use a lot of up-to-date softwares that kind of facilitate that kind of online learning. And for instance, I use the software in which, for instance, I gave the assignment to my students after teaching about, let's say, a movement analysis and certain ways of observing the movement. I would give them a assignment to go into the real situation in some kind of public environment, and to kind of observe what I call an occupational movement. So let's say, for instance, they go into a restaurant and they kind of observe the movement of a waiter, for instance, cleaning the table. That would be what we call the flicking quality of movement, flick. If you were to clean the table really fast, there's a certain type of quality of movement that they will engage in. And then I encourage the students to notice what kind of movements are associated with certain careers. How do they relate to us socially and culturally? And then I encourage them to share that kind of information with each other, but they have to do that by posting actually the video and their commentary of the experience themselves.
Yeah. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, I never thought of that. That sounds like a very interesting assignment.
Yeah, well, we depend a lot on that kind of physical interpretation of movement, and when you teach online, you actually don't have that face-to-face experience necessarily with students. So I kind of use this type of softwares to engage them with each other and also with the material.
Okay,
And then also
so they're learning analysis, peer-to-peer, and they're learning application of software at the same time.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay, well now let's move on to some,
Right.
like, I want to call them Eastern European
All right.
questions,
Yeah.
kind of. And we talked a lot about, the mission of schools, the
Mhm.
mission of teachers and so on. And so if someone were to ask you, how would you summarize your goal as a teacher? What are you trying to instill in your students? And I kind of already know a little bit of what your
Yeah,
answer is going to be. I mean, it's not going to be just how to dance, right?
Mhm.
It's something more than that. But how can you express that in as concisely as possible?
All right. Well, I appreciate the question. I'm the kind of pedagogue that really believes in a few principles when it comes to myself and my life, and also to way I try to teach my students. And that's number one. I believe that we should learn and be allowed to fail as a process of learning.
Okay.
We see that with postmodernists, for instance. They experiment a lot with chance in creative process, where it's non-planned. It's in content improvisation, for instance, which became very popular with postmodernists. There's that sense of like you don't pre-plan every action that you're going to do. So there's an element of surprise, and also personal investigation that happens in a moment. When you actually cannot be in charge of certain actions.
Right.
And all of that actually teach students that failure is part of the creative process.
So you think that this brings people back to a natural perspective on the world, a more realistic perspective?
I really do. I believe that fostering authenticity in students, and I work in a College of Fine Arts and Performing Arts, I believe that fostering that personal voice of authenticity is very important. And also, I try to emphasize to my students the fact that this is a very collaborative type of world we live in today, and that as you're trying to define your own personal voice, we're understanding more and more that we cannot do that in a certain type of a vacuum. And so when we see, for instance, in the world of dance, we see a lot of collaboration with architects who really work with space, and space is one of the four basic elements of dance. We talk about space, shape, time, and energy. So as I think about four basic elements of dance, I collaborate, for instance, with space. I collaborate with, and I encourage my students to work.
So just to refocus this, a willingness to take chances. And an openness to collaboration.
Absolutely.
And these are values or perspectives that will carry through regardless of whatever path they choose in life. Presumably, they're not, most of them won't be professional dancers, right? So, in other words, whatever they're going to do. So they use this opportunity or interaction with you as a way of learning this, let's call it a life skill. Although, from our previous discussion, I'm not sure I really like the word skill. It's more of a
process.
Or maybe an attitude or value or morality even.
Well, to be honest, I'm very unorthodox when it comes to higher academia and teaching. I believe that in a creative process, if we talk about choreography or composition, just like in painting, I believe that it's hard to kind of like grade students in the creative process. We encourage them to feel, to be creative, to devise their own voices and things like that. And I really do believe in a system that actually is just fail or pass.
Oh, okay. So how does that work with higher ed? I mean, with the administration?
Well, my experience has shown that self-evaluations during the creative process are very crucial. I believe that they hold very true to, and you're pretty close to what your professional.
Actually, there's a lot of research on that as well. A lot of students, if they are to give themselves a grade, there have been experiments done with that. Grade yourself honestly, it's the same grade that they would have gotten.
Absolutely. And what I was going to say is that what I really encourage, the third principle of my pedagogy is really fostering that beautiful tradition of mentorship. I think that sometimes we forget that we're really mentors to these students, not necessarily just the experts in our field, which we obviously are, but that we are first and foremost mentors. And when I put myself in the place of being a mentor to my students during the creative process, I think think that there's no fear to gain a certain grade or fail. I think as long as is authenticity and hard effort and chance taking and things like that is part of the process, I think the professor actually can gauge that better and actually during the process really be able to evaluate the students. And so for me, pass and fail grade is very fair because I'm not really a person to judge someone's creative process completely based on
I get it. That's excellent. Okay, now here's the tough question that I promise you I'd have left you. Right. So here it is. If life is a dance, okay, what dance is it, and how would you do it?
That's a really, 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 really wonderful question. I am a very serious practitioner of yoga. And I believe that yoga, as an instructor of yoga, we talk about yoga a lot as the art and science of yoga. I believe that the most valid type of dance is the one in which the human involved in a process of moving is really expressing him or herself. And we see that, for instance, in a lot of cultural dances, where there's no that concern with performative aspect of dance, where you're not expected to entertain, for instance, but where it's a purely expression of a collective, in a sense. For me, I don't know if there's particular dance itself that I would say, but for instance, when I think about hula dances of Hawaiian culture, or when I think about some Aboriginal tribes, there's a beautiful sense of grace, of authenticity, of honesty behind it that I feel that teaches us a lot in the Western cultures, that the dance, as much as we think about in Western culture as being something that we perform for others, actually it's a very personal process. And just like yoga is a personal spiritual practice that's actually physicalized through the body, I think still the emphasis is on a personal journey and the expression that is between oneself and perhaps maybe something outside of ourselves.
Right, so it's not a particular dance then, it's more of whatever it is that you're doing and how you do it. And you said that some of the Aboriginal folk movements and dances represent perhaps more of our humanity rather than something that's a performance. So in other words, if you would have answered a ballet, which I thought that maybe one of your friends might have answered. Okay.
As a classically trained dancer, a lot of people would think that. However, for instance, as much as I love and appreciate the tradition of ballet, I always think that ballet vocabulary is so unique that it's always imposed upon you as a dancer. And you're expressing yourself through someone else's vocabulary.
So you would do it in a way that expresses and manifests your personal journey. Is that correct? Or?
Yes, and I think it's about a particular sense of presence, I should say. With some great artists we can see that where, for instance, everything is very conscious. If it's a sense of interpretation of space and energy in space and time.
Let me ask you this before we close, and it just occurs to me now that when talking about great artists, do you think that when we're seeing performance in a ballet that we're seeing some aspect of what you just said, their own personal, it's so powerful that you feel their personal journey, their personal metaphysical perspective somehow manifested in something which is really a cultural archetype of some type?
I will be honest, I don't consider myself to be a formalist as an art maker.
You've gone beyond me.
So for instance, for me, like, as much as I think the form is very important, I'm very drawn as a choreographer and as an educator, I'm drawn to authenticity and vulnerability. Those are two things.
Well, was I partly right there with what I was
Yes,
saying? Okay.
absolutely. And I was just relating to what you said,
Yeah.
that to me there's something about that extra thing that makes us human, that expression of someone's spirit and intent. That is very important to me. And of course, as someone who says that I'm not a formalist, being an expressionist myself, I believe the human emotion is on the top of my list.
I
Yeah.
got you. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. By the way, for our viewers,
Yes.
Stevan was a national artistic yoga
Yes, I was
champion in
2012
right? So
USA men's champion.
yeah, that's terrific.
Yeah.
And wow, so I really appreciate your participation in this spontaneous interview.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So until next time, we'll say goodbye now.
Thank
Bye.
you. Wonderful journey with learning.
Bye.
Bye.